right. Welcome back from break, everybody. Very excited for today's events, and particularly the panel we're about to do, which is on perhaps my favorite topic in the whole world, which is how to attract landlords to participate in the housing voucher program. And I know the name of the panel says in tight markets, and that's clearly the kinds of markets where attracting landlords is the most difficult. But given the overall mobility goals of this conference and the voucher program in general, I feel like every market has some portion of it that could be considered tight, in which attracting landlords is desirable and important. So my name is Phil Garboden. I'm on faculty here at the University of Hawaii, and I'm joined by three terrific panelists today. We have Justin Davis, Director of the HCV program at the Columbus Metro Housing Authority. We have Jackie Hodges, Assistant Director of the HCV program and the Housing Authority at the Housing Authority of Cook County. And we have Jeanmarie Buffett, who's the Vice President of Real Estate at CDCLI Long Island. In terms of format, I think we all agreed to give quick presentations, say roughly 5 to 7 minutes each, and then we'll move on to Q&A. If you have questions you'd like me to ask, and I hope you will have many, please pop in the Q&A and I'll ask as many as possible, time permitting. I'd like to start by, or I was asked to start by calling my own number a little bit and provide some big picture on the research and what we know related to landlord engagement. And then we'll move on to what the folks who are actually doing the work, and you can hear about three very innovative approaches to this. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So a little bit of background on myself and the research that I've been doing with a large team of folks now sort of scattered all over the country. Basically, we've spent the last 5 years having over 150 conversations with landlords in Baltimore, Cleveland, Dallas, and Washington, D.C. And the questions that we had for them related fairly closely to their experiences of the HCV program, what they liked about the program and what they didn't. And I put the two reports up there in case anyone's interested in reading more. But the headlines of those findings is first and foremost to emphasize that there are clear benefits for landlords for participation in the HCV program, particularly in markets where tenants have volatile incomes. And I think it's important to always start there, because we always want to start with the fact that it's too easy to start with some of the landlords' concerns about participation and not emphasize that, especially having gone through a period where everybody basically had volatile incomes in COVID, that actually being able to depend on a significant portion of your rent every month is, of course, a huge benefit, and one that PHAs can and do emphasize in their marketing materials. But when you look at middle, high income, and opportunity neighborhoods, we really sort of have four main buckets of concerns that landlords have. The first is that the essential element is that nobody is going to reduce their rent to accept a voucher holder, right? If they think they can get a certain rent from a market tenant, then they're going to charge that rent. And so it's very important, and we heard in the last panel about small area FMRs and other techniques to sort of make sure you're coming in at the asking rent in each neighborhood in which you're interested in placing voucher holders. We also heard a lot about frustration over process delays, and particularly landlords focused on the time period between when they accept a tenant into housing and when that first payment arrives. And so, that can be for a market tenant as little as a week. For a HCV tenant in some markets, that can take longer as all the process continues. We heard concerns about inspection capriciousness, right? So landlords were concerned that inspections were hard to predict what an inspector might find. Importantly, we didn't hear much critique, although about the particular standards, which most landlords felt were fairly reasonable by and large. It was only that what the value to them was being able to prep a unit in advance so that they can be assured that it would pass. We also heard about desire for PHAs to interfere on behalf of landlord and tenant disputes. Of course, this is not PHA's job. PHAs are necessarily required to be on both sides or on either side. They're not necessarily in positioned exclusively to defend landlords, but landlords generally felt that they were doing housing authorities a favor by accepting their voucher holders, and expected housing authorities to respond in turn by supporting their position in landlord-tenant disputes. And of course, there was a higher scrutiny of voucher households due to pre-existing stereotypes about the types of folks with vouchers and what that would mean and the anticipated behaviors in the unit. And of course, none of those behaviors are backed up by actual empirical evidence. And I think this last point actually gets to a debate I've seen a lot around landlord incentives, which is the question is how much of the concerns about the program are what a lawyer would call pretextual, just to mask bias and stigma against voucher holders. And I think the argument that I would make in response to that is that, yes, certainly some aspect of it is influenced by these pre-existing perspectives on voucher holders, but ultimately, if you shift the economic incentives for landlords, you will shift their willingness to overcome their preconceived notions and stereotypes. You won't, of course, be able to achieve universal enthusiasm for the program, but you can still move the needle pretty substantially through other incentives. I also want to note that at least in the metro areas, we studied their high levels of unit turnover, right? So a unit that's subsidized in one year, actually fairly frequently is not subsidized the next, and when a tenant leaves, they are only in rare cases replaced by another voucher tenant. And it's important to recognize that we have areas of concentrated voucher and landlords who specialize in the voucher program, and in those cases, their voucher tenants are replaced by new voucher tenants over and over again. That's sort of the entire business model. But we actually have a lot of noise and a lot of opportunity, therefore, to touch and give landlords firsthand experience with the voucher program and focus on retaining those that are running high quality units in opportunity neighborhoods. Oops. And so, of course, in light of this and other research, there's been a lot of local innovation around what can be done to attract more landlords to the voucher program. And that's the point of this panel, is for you to hear some of the amazing examples of that local innovation. This has led to a national RCT through the MTW Cohort 4 expansion to evaluate the effectiveness of various landlord incentives. And so as usual, we see this wonderful learning process where folks are innovating on the ground. That lessons learned moves up to the HUD level. HUD does experimental work on determining effectiveness, and we have this sort of cyclical learning process, which is of course the way it's supposed to work. But landlord incentives can mean all manner of different things, right? They can include simply small area fair market rents, increased payment standards, and cash incentives, sort of the bundle of putting more money to help. They can mean damage insurance and repair funds, sort of incentivizing landlords by ensuring that their units are kept at quality standards. They can involve bridge payments between HCV households, so encouraging replacing one HCV household with another, advanced payments to cover up the delays before move-in, even a master leasing or an acquisition program that we heard about in the last panel. Folks are thinking about inspection schedule changes. That's a part of the MTW cohort expansion, inspection waivers, pre-qualification for new units that are unlikely to show hazardous aspects. And then we have a whole bundle of different marketing strategies, programs of benefit, landlord liaison specialists. And again, you'll hear in the panel coming up about workshops and landlord technical assistance and that type of engagement. On the tenant side, we also have expanding evidence of the value of counseling, right? Of having that intermediary sort of negotiate with landlords on your behalf and the value that can have for mobility and so forth. And then we have finally the most direct measure of simply making it illegal to discriminate against otherwise qualified voucher tenants through source of income discrimination, although of course enforcement is the constant question there. So when we're talking about landlord incentives, we really have a vast menu from which to choose from, and the idea is to customize it for the unique characteristics of any metro area. And I also wanted to close on the question of what are these incentives for, right? And I think at a housing mobility conference, it's the clearest place to have that discussion. At a fundamental level, you're not going to succeed unless you're increasing success rates and decreasing search time and frustration. So, sort of the basic outcome of any landlord engagement process is to help families find housing when they've been issued a voucher more quickly. But I think depending on the PHA and depending on the context, there are a number of secondaries to the goal, right? Simply increasing the pool of willing landlords, sort of emphasizing the choice element of the housing choice voucher program, and thereby increasing the pool of available neighborhoods. From a mobility context, that means explicitly targeting your outreach efforts to neighborhoods of opportunity, neighborhoods in which voucher holders desire to live. And so improving the neighborhood conditions overall of voucher families, and avoiding the spatial clustering of voucher families that we see in for instance, parts of Baltimore, in Eva Rose's book and whatnot. And then there's sort of other goals in terms of, can we increase the landlord-tenant ratio? And this I think is a very interesting question. Is it better for a program to have more landlords per voucher, or to have a few high-quality landlords, perhaps in holding sort of neighborhood and unit quality constant? And again, I think that depends on the distribution of ownership in any particular metro area. We also can have goals for increasing landlord retention, right? Not just about getting new landlords, but keeping those with desirable units in the program. And other goals such as avoiding or reducing cross-subsidization in like-type properties, right? So if voucher holders have more available options outside of low-income housing tax credit, the low-income housing tax credit can serve more low or moderate income renters, and the vouchers can serve extremely low income renters, and you could sort of get more bang for your buck that way. So, I think it's always interesting and important to think about what are the actual goals here. And this is something when we were thinking through how to design the evaluation for MTW UQ4, the team I'm on with Apt Associates, thinking about what types of outcomes we wanted to consider, and of course what outcomes the data would allow us to consider were sort of important, but ultimately a normative, sort of a question of desire. So that's my sort of broad overview, hopefully just sort of giving the 20,000 feet overview of landlord incentives. I'm going to pass the Zoom mic, as it were, now to our panelists who can talk about their music experience. I'm just going to go in the order on the program. So I'll queue up Justin Davis from the Columbus Metro PHA to talk about his work on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Give me 1 second while I share my screen, show you my presentation. All right, everyone see that. So Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority is where I am operating out of right now. I am the Vice President of the Housing Choice Voucher Program there. Very, very excited to be here with you and have the opportunity to present what we are doing here in Columbus. There we go. I wanted to go over our mission as the HCV department in conjunction with CMHA's mission, because I feel like that has gotten us to where we're trying to go in terms of our landlord incentives and how we are serving our residents. So our voucher program mission is empowering our clients to live in the housing they choose, in the neighborhood they choose, and with our partners providing them with the services they need. And CMHA's mission is CMHA helps people access affordable housing through collaborative partnerships to develop, renovate, and maintain housing, promote neighborhood revitalization, and assist residents in accessing needed social services. When I took over the department November 30th, 2021, we knew we were going to be in a situation where we needed landlords. So we started devising a plan on how we can entice them to participate in our program that much more. The first thing we came up with was our tenants needed assistance paying security deposits during the pandemics. So for 0 to 2 bedrooms, we determined that we could contribute up to $500 for security deposits. For 3 bedrooms and up, we determined that $750 as a security deposit assistance was a solid number. We started that on April 1st. At the same time, we started a vacancy payment because, as Phil said, owners are often waiting for that first payment. So we wanted to make sure that they were kept whole. We followed the same premise of for 0 to 2 bedrooms, $500, and for 3 bedrooms and up, $750. We allocated $1.5 million for this program, and it's going to end at the end of 2021. Right now, we ran numbers at the beginning of the week. We have processed out $381,739 in security deposit assistance for our clients and $513,000 in vacancy payments to our owners. Broke it down a little bit further by month so you can see how the spending went. Again, we started this in April. We had a huge uptick in vacancy payments. We had landlords who wanted to participate in our program that much more so. We already had our normal clients going through the process of being issued a voucher and things of that nature. But where we took it a step further, we partnered with a third party, and we have been having them process eligibility for us. So far, they have issued several hundred vouchers on our behalf, with another 600 in the pipeline to be coming here potentially by the end of the year. But as you see, our numbers, they're trending down right now. Reason why I say they're trending down is we have 200 families currently going through the contracting process. We have worked through the pandemics to get back to 60 days for all of our contracts. So we are very, very pleased to say that we are there. And as we continue to move forward, we expect our numbers to level off and have September and October numbers truly catch up to where August is right now, and potentially even July, based on what I've seen preliminarily. So what we got from this, you see, April, we got 123 landlords, and it's again trended down. But one of the things that we noticed, we had landlords doubling up each month. So on the next slide, you're going to see something that was surprising to us. Again, I told you guys for 3 bedrooms and up, we were only paying $750. And as you see on this next slide, for our vacancy payments to our 123 landlords and 109 landlords, 98 landlords, every month, except for these last 2, which are still being processed, has resulted in our owners being paid more than, because they are picking up more than one client. They've realized the benefit of these extra dollars, and as a result, they are joining our program. So we are definitely pleased to see how these averages are improving for us. When we ran our numbers, we were at, I believe, the 623 new clients this year alone. So we're definitely pleased that we are seeing this positive trend in new clients, in addition to us having our own vouchers out on the street. So we're noticing the positivenesses from it. But when we get to the Q&A session, I feel like I have some insights that will make these numbers that much more interesting. Thank you, Phil.
I think Jackie Hodges is up next, so pass it to her from the Housing Authority of Cook County.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen here. I always like to apologize in advance for any technical difficulties in the beginning. So that covers me. There we go. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to join this esteemed panel and talk today about our landlord outreach. As Phil stated, I'm Jackie Hodges, the Assistant Director of the Voucher Program with the Housing Authority of Cook County. We are in, our service area is the suburban Cook County area in Illinois. I've been with the Housing Authority since 2008. And when I started here at the Housing Authority, and one of my major responsibilities now is landlord outreach. Our landlord outreach consisted of 2 workshops an evening for 2 hours twice a year, and it was 3 hours of landlords just complaining to us about the Housing Authority of Cook County and the voucher program. So when our executive director came, he said, Jack, we're going to really revamp this landlord outreach department, and we want to educate landlords. We want to provide information to them. So 1, they feel a part of this program, and 2, they understand it. So the understanding that if they understand how the program works, 2 really good things are going to happen. 1, we're going to move our tenants in faster, and 2, I'm going to get landlords paid sooner. And that, that every time I talk to landlords, that opens their eyes. So we conduct 2 landlord workshops every month. I've been doing this since February of 2012. I've talked to a lot of landlords. I am the direct contact, so they like that. They know my information. If they have any challenges or problems, they come to me directly. So I strongly encourage that for other PHAs, have that point of contact. These workshops are voluntary. Pre-COVID, I was doing them in person. We would have 12 to 15 participants. Now I do them via Zoom. I think I have more, 25 to 30. Maybe it's because they can just click onto the Zoom as opposed to coming out and going to a meeting. I get new landlords, returning landlords, realtors, maintenance workers, management agents, municipal staff. Sometimes I get a management company that calls me up and says, hey, can you provide training for my entire staff? So I call myself the traveling show, and I go out there and I provide this information. Whatever we have to do to really get the message out and educate landlords or potential landlords on the program. So my workshops last an hour and a half. I have question and answer period throughout, and really doing it that way, it really sparks some good conversations. I sometimes laugh because I get landlords that are returning landlords every month. And I've once said to them, why do you come all the time? And they say, because I always learn something from your workshops. There's always different conversations and touch on different topics. So the two topics that I touch on are nuts and bolts of the program and HQS inspections. So my nuts and bolts workshop, that's really the fan favorite, I say. It touches on the HCV program in general, and then we talk about it from the Housing Authority of Cook County's perspective, and then we go into the move process. So I talk about everything from how do you get a tenant, screening your tenant, inspections, rent offer, HAP contract, and finally, how do we get you paid? And again, we focus on, you are a priority for us landlords. Without you, we wouldn't have this program. I also use it as an opportunity to really give out any updates. So maybe we've changed our payment standards. Maybe we had a freeze on rent increases and now we're doing them. And I always touch on fair housing. It's a great opportunity to talk to landlords about avoiding fair housing discriminations. We talk about source of income. We talked about just housing ordinance that we have. So again, I use this as a tool to get any additional information that I need out there. The second workshop is HQS inspections. I'm over our third-party inspection contractor. So I really talk about, hey, ways to pass your unit the first time, because that's really the goal. If we can pass the unit, have them accept the rent offer, we can get the tenant moved in faster and get them paid faster. I know someone mentioned that landlords look negatively on, I think it was Philip, on inspections. When I talk to them about, hey, why don't you turn that and use it as a benefit? Let's look at this as something that we can ensure our property is decent, safe, and sanitary. Let's make sure there aren't any lead-based paint deficiencies in your unit or anything that could cause problems for our families that move in. So the second type of outreach we do is an annual landlord seminar. Now, during COVID, haven't been able to do that. But hopefully we'll go back to that. And that's an all-day event. And our landlords really enjoyed that. We offered a variety of topics and guest speakers. We had light breakfast and some snacks and beverages throughout the day. And it really was an opportunity to gauge and get a wider variety and pool of landlords. Maybe your market rate landlord that heard I was having a speaker talk about how to appeal your taxes. So they came, and now I'm able to educate them on the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So here's a copy of what my agenda was. I talked about the voucher program. I had an inspection person come in from my company and talk. We had someone from the health department talk about important topics like lead-based paint hazards and smoke-free housing. I had someone from the sheriff's department talk about evictions. Not that we want to encourage evictions, but unfortunately, sometimes that happens. So we gave them the tools to navigate that process. My mobility team came in and talked about that program, someone from a tenant screening company. And again, I had an attorney come in and talk about tax appeals. We had positive feedback. The landlords really enjoyed the fact that we provided a variety of topics and that we were able to educate them on areas outside of just renting and home ownership in general. So negative, I laugh because they wanted more of these events, but unfortunately, all we were able to do is once a year. So let's talk about challenges versus benefits on landlord outreach. I mean, Philip mentioned a lot of the challenges. So there's criticism and complaints. There's the social stigma that you hear about voucher tenants, Section 8 tenants. And then we have challenges because we have lack of staff. So our department is me. I wish I can go out and provide landlord outreach to every one of our landlords in training, but we just can't do that. So we try to hit as many as we can. Benefits, I'm out there providing current information about the program. And we actually have taken that negativity and turned it around as a positive for us. So we listen to the criticisms and say, hey, how are there ways that maybe we have to tighten up the inspection process, or maybe ways that we can make the process work faster and more expeditiously and better. And again, an opportunity to provide other information about home ownership. So the Housing Authority of Cook County has definitely found the benefits of really putting your time and energy and efforts into landlord education far outweigh the challenges. And I'm going to wrap up real quick. Just want to touch on our community choice program, which is our mobility program incentives. We do pay up to $2,000 in security deposit or $499 in move-in fees. Our mobility counselors have a smaller staff, so they're able to really work on matching up landlords with units and opportunity areas with our tenants on the community choice program. And we can get that move process happen faster, let's say 30 days for a regular voucher tenant, 14 days for our mobility tenants. And then last, we have monetary incentives, $500 for new landlords and $250 for existing that refer new landlords onto our program. So that is my presentation. Thank you. And let me turn it over to Jeanmarie.
All right, great. Thank you, Jackie. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so thank you. I have to start off by saying what a wonderful set of panelists that I get to present here with, and presentations earlier, all throughout the day. We're a relative newcomer to the mobility space, and it's just been so great to hear about all the great work and great minds that have been, kind of paving the way here as we launch our program. And I'm just very grateful to get to share our experience here. So again, my name is Jeanmarie Buffett. I'm with Community Development Corporation of Long Island. And this is just a little bit about us. We were founded 50 years ago. We have a number of programs and business lines. We're a charter neighbor works organization, a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. But today I'm going to talk to you about one of our newest programs, the Neighborhood Choice Long Island Mobility Program. And this is just before I start on the mobility program, just to give you a little bit of context about where we are, what our market is. This is a map of Long Island, and I'll explain the highlighted areas in a moment. But we are covering Nassau and Suffolk counties, so we're just west of New York City. Our program area covers a range of communities. In the western end, we're dense suburban community, and we get pretty rural out on our east end. We have high cost of living here. Thinking about some of the figures that Justin was giving earlier, our 3-bedroom fair market rents for 2022 are a little over $2,600 a month. So pretty high rents in our area, and a lack of rental housing overall. Only 18% of our housing stock is rental housing, which is significantly lower than other suburban communities in our region. And during COVID, we've seen increasing tightening of our rental market, a lot of demands, particularly from people who have moved out from the city and surrounding areas. So, we've only seen it get more competitive for our voucher holders. We've also, thinking to one of the earlier panels, I know our colleagues in New York City were talking about the role of real estate brokers. Real estate brokers over the last few years have more and more become the gatekeepers for the Long Island rental market as well. Most of the listings we see have a real estate broker attached to them. And although in New York, we're fortunate to have expansive state and local fair housing protections, including source of income as a protected class, we do still see families with vouchers experience widespread discrimination in the rental market. So what you have here kind of illustrates as well, we're a high cost of living area, but we have pockets of both low poverty and high poverty. So our regional poverty rate is less than 7%. However, that masks some significant discrepancies in the region, with some communities closer to 25% and up. And this map, which was created by the New York State Homes and Community Renewal Fair and Equitable Housing Office, shows census tracts with both high performing schools and poverty rates below 10%, which are the areas that we target in our mobility program. So we are one of 3 pilot mobility programs in New York State, which are funded by enterprise community partners and supported with technical assistance through Mobility Works. We were envisioned pre-pandemic and we launched in June of 2020. So a lot has happened since we first envisioned the program. But since then, we've enrolled over 50 families. We've moved 15 with our 16th next week to the well-resourced areas that were identified on the previous slide. Our program, as far as the supports that we provide participants, they receive training on personal finance, housing search best practices, and fair housing. We provide funds to help cover moving costs, security deposits, and brokers' fees. We have peer-to-peer support events, including connecting participants who've made a move with those who are still in their housing search. And our coaches work with participants throughout the process and are there for them after the move with support. So since launching, we've seen a lot of interest in the program, but we have seen our participants face challenges in finding housing in our target opportunity areas. So in addition to the support we're giving participants directly, landlord outreach has been from the beginning, we knew was going to have to be a big part of our program as well. And we do this in a variety of ways. Our team has one-on-one outreach to local realtors. We provide we reach out to local realtors in connection with listings that we see, but we also make connections from past experience in the real estate field. I'm actually vice president of real estate for CDCLI, so we really try to leverage those connections to the realtor community, including with our local trade groups. The Long Island Board of Realtors is one, where we have taken part in their forums to get the word out more broadly. And then we also have CDCLI is the local administrator for Suffolk County for the Housing Choice Voucher Program for New York State. And we have monthly landlord forums, although I think I need to get some tips from Jackie to get our attendance up. 25 to 30 landlords sounds really great. So we've had a little bit less than that since we've transitioned to virtual during COVID, but we still, it's still a good way to connect with our landlords. So when we're doing that outreach, we are talking generally about the benefits of working with the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which, particularly during COVID, the ability to have a portion of the rent covered by the program and be an assured rent payment, even if the tenant loses employment, is very. I think we've all learned, especially over this last year and a half, 2 years, how important that can be. But we also highlight 2 other benefits that are newer to our region that our landlords often aren't aware of. So one is, thanks to the efforts of New York State HCR, we are able to offer higher payment standards in many of our opportunity areas, either with special exception payment standard census tracts that the state applied for and received special approval from HUD to implement, or we've also recently enacted small area FMR based payment standards in 18 zip codes across Nassau and Suffolk County. And this is available to all of our voucher holders, not just the ones working with the mobility program. So we get this word out, our rental assistance department gets this word out. And this is, of course, very interesting to landlords who may assume that a voucher participant is priced out of their development, their unit, but with these recent changes, they may not be. And then also through the mobility program, we're offering a new kind of landlord incentive with our housing quality incentive funds, which I'm going to talk about next. So our HQI funds are designed to offset the cost of rehab needed prior to move-in. And since we implemented this incentive a year ago, we found landlords take advantage of these funds with more than half of our moves. It's really been a great incentive that has kind of tipped the scales for landlords that have a lot of demands for their vacant units. Very often we have units that are gone within a day of listing or have lines at open houses, the way you see for sale properties. We see that for our rental properties. So, with that kind of competition, this seems to be an incentive that makes a difference for a good number of landlords. And it's particularly attractive to smaller landlords who have single family homes or maybe duplexes with smaller portfolios rather than the larger multifamily sites. And the way it works is a landlord completes their rehab work with their own funds. Then they submit costs for those improvements, proof of those costs with invoices, receipts to the housing coach for review. They can also apply for funds to be used for local rental permit fees, which is great in our region because we have a myriad of local municipalities, and a lot of them have local rental permit requirements as well. So then the coach verifies the work was done and verifies the costs, and then they will send the landlord an HQI agreement, which indicates the amounts of funds that we will disperse and includes a commitment from them that they will lease to an NCLI family for at least 3 years. The landlord agreement can be signed prior to lease signing, which gives the landlord assurance of what funds will be available so that it's part of their decision process in leasing to the family. But the payment is only made once the family moves in. And that allows us some assurance in the process that the landlord is acting in good faith and will lease to the family, and that the unit passes HQS inspection and the repairs have been done. So this is just an example of before and after photos of one of the units we funded. And you can see, things like windows, bathroom fixtures, paint. These are items that appear on the housing choice voucher, housing quality standards checklist, or local permitting requirements, which are sometimes more restrictive. And this is a breakdown. So far, we've funded 5, although we do have one more coming. That was one of our November lease ups. Actually, both of our November lease ups, I think, are going to be utilizing these funds. But this table shows a breakdown of the types of improvements completed, the funds the landlord spent, which total up in the second column from the right with the total amount spent. Those are the total funds the landlords have spent, and then the HQI funds distributed. So far, we've limited the disbursements to $5,000, even though expenses are higher than that, in an effort to kind of balance getting the funds to stretch as far as we can, but also to have it be a meaningful amount that acts as a true incentive for landlords. As I mentioned, our 3-bedroom fair market rents are a little north of $2,600 a month. Our exception payment standards range, but they're all over $3,000 a month for a 3-bedroom. So, a $5,000 incentive works out to be a little less than 2 months rent. So we've seen, as I mentioned, the single family landlords seem to be more interested in the funds than larger multifamily properties. We also see that when we're able to get past a real estate agent and speak to a landlord directly, these funds are of great interest to the landlords. Sometimes the listing agent is not as interested in them, but when we are able to deal directly with the landlord, we've seen across the board that there's a lot of interest in this. So that is it for me, and looking forward to more discussion.
Wonderful, thank you so much, and thank you to all the panelists. I was frantically jotting notes during all of this because it's such fascinating stuff. So I have a million follow-up questions, but I'll defer to the wonderful ones in the Q&A at the moment. It looks like Matthew has a pretty specific question, so I'll just leave that to Justin to answer sort of offline. But I wanted to start with the next question, which was also directed at Justin, but I think is relevant to all of us, which is one of the facets of ERA was the ability to use funds to expand and experiment with these programs, and indeed sort of continue on with ERA2 and so forth. So I'm curious about how important both the flexibility and the funds were during the last year for some of the innovations you folks have talked about, and then also your ability to sort of support those efforts long term. So I'll start with Justin because the question was directed at him, but I'd love to hear from the whole panel.
So thank you for the question. So as part of the board for our ERA dollars here in Central Ohio, we have definitely partnered with our local community action network. We set aside $50,000 of our funds that we ultimately had matched for ERA dollars that helped our participants avoid a lot of the eviction issues that our community was facing. Although they also have the protection of interims, we still found that many of our clients needed to take advantage of these ERA dollars. One of the things that I would say we realized was that there was a large amount of confusion about who's actually eligible for these ERA dollars. And once we clarified that to our community, we saw much more adoption of the request of the ERA dollars. Once we went to the self-attestation, we saw an even greater uptick in the utilization of our ERA dollars. At the Housing Authority, we put up all of our own dollars to fund our landlord incentives and our security deposit assistance. And since we still have those funds available, basically almost another $500,000, we have not went to ERA at all. One of the things that I can tell you that we are looking at doing is continuing to move forward with spending our own money to fund our landlord incentives. We are also looking at the MTW cohorts to see if that is something that we would potentially want to do. But right now, we are doing this on our own to see how far it actually gets us. And I told you guys some numbers earlier, but I wanted to clarify. Our landlord incentives have netted us 230 new landlords and 623 actual new clients as of Monday.
Wonderful. I don't know if Jackie or Jeanmarie want to jump in with any thoughts on ERA and how they were able to leverage that going forward.
So at the Housing Authority of Cook County, we too are using our own dollars for our security deposit and move-in fees and any incentives. But with the ERA too, we have provided the information to our HCD clients and our public housing clients that now that multifamily clients that round of funding, they are eligible for the rent assistance as well as late fees, security deposit fees, move fees, et cetera. So we're really working hard to process those cases in ERA2 and fund as many as we possibly can, as fast as we possibly can.
I'll give Jeanmarie a chance if she wants to move on to the next question, if she doesn't have any specific ERA related comments. All right, I'm curious about it, and there's actually a couple of folks are asking about this. We know, or at least I think we know that when a market rate tenant does something wrong, the tenant themselves is blamed. When a voucher tenant does something wrong, the voucher program is blamed, right? And so it's important, I think, to think about how we respond in the cases where voucher tenants, behave in a way that landlords at least feel is not ideal for their profitability. So I'm curious how your agencies respond to landlord tenant disputes. How do you intervene? How do you ensure that landlord doesn't have a negative experience that sort of turns them off from the program entirely, while of course supporting the tenant in what they need around their rights and so forth in the unit?
Well, I'll start and apologize for stepping in over you. One of the things that we did, and like several other PHAs, that landlord liaison position became very, very important to us, especially as we rolled into the pandemic. We had started that position prior to, but we realized that our landlords, our clients, they still needed to have that connection to us, but in a way that allowed them to get something in return. They needed that person who was here on the ground level working with us that understood the plights that they were dealing with our clients. And we realized that not all of our clients are great clients, but we do have a large group of our clients that just want to live, want to take care of their units, want to be able to enjoy them just like everybody else. And I feel like the stereotypes ultimately negatively affect those families as well, which is one of the reasons why we ultimately have a harder issue of getting new landlords to join our program.
So I'll go ahead and answer next. I face this a lot, and what I consistently say to landlords is, you may have a voucher client who violates the terms of your lease, but you can as easily have a market rate tenant that can violate the same term of the lease. And I say, the benefit for you is, if you're a landlord on our Housing Choice Voucher Program, you have the housing authority that can try to step in and assist. Now, we make it perfectly clear that, we won't get involved with the landlord tenant disputes. However, let's say, for example, you have a tenant that isn't paying rent, and it's because their income decreased. They can contact, and again, I reiterate this to the landlords, that you can contact the caseworker and tell the tenant to contact the caseworker, and we do an interim. With a market rate tenant, you don't have that luxury. Your next step is to go to court. So I remind them of, yeah, this is the same as a market rate situation, where you could have a market rate tenant that is having unauthorized individuals or damage to your unit. But you do have the benefit of the housing authority that can try to get that tenant back on track and get the landlord made whole, where you don't have that benefit with a market rate world.
Terrific. Jeanmarie, do you have any thoughts on how you handle this?
I mean, what Jackie just described is really, the way we handle it, and our coaches handle it as well. I mean, our rental assistance department, so our general administration of the vouchers, we also, stay out of landlord tenant disputes. But, one additional thing that our mobility program is available to do is, our coaches are there to help facilitate communication between the landlord and tenant. So, and part of our training for our participants includes best practices for being a good tenant, for staying in communication with your landlord. And, little problems become big problems when you're not able to communicate and you're not talking to each other. So, that's just one additional thing. And that's something that we stress when we are talking to real estate professionals and landlords. Of course, the concerns are based on stereotypes and based on, discriminatory, have a discriminatory basis, but our coaches try to, still engage in the conversation and point out the positives and the support they provide.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's a very challenging thing, and I feel like these are all really informative answers on how to handle the situation. I'm curious, and I should say from my own research, landlords' expectations about what a PHA is legally allowed to do in terms of intervening are quite off the map. So some technical assistance is just informing them in advance about what a PHA is actually legally allowed to intervene with, right, and where they can help, as Jackie pointed out, and perhaps where it's a lease violation that needs to be dealt with in the traditional way. So. I'm curious, you mentioned, Jeanmarie, you mentioned the sort of stereotypes and whatnot. And of course, you and Cook County both have source of income discrimination legislation on the books, or at least I trust Phil Tegler in the chat here Q&A to know that. How do you handle in these programs, when a tenant comes back to you and makes a pretty explicit description of direct voucher discrimination, right? From everything from a landlord simply saying, no, we don't accept vouchers, to what seems like a very non-coincidental ghosting or disappearance of that landlord from the back and forth. What's the process by which you handle that and handle the sort of civil rights aspect of this?
So I can take a go at that. Unfortunately, even though source of income is a protected class in New York State, we have found that discrimination is rampant. And when we started the mobility program, we expected that would be the case, but it's really more the rule than the exception. And even from our professional real estate community, which ostensibly are getting paid and have education in this area to not do that. And, I think for us, we certainly report those issues when we see them. I mean, we do try to engage to de-escalate, because ultimately we're not an enforcement agency. We're a mobility program. So our primary goal is to move our families who want to move into opportunity areas to help them access that housing. So our primary goal is to try and educate and work with the individual. But in cases where, it's really flagrant in writing, we do obviously report those cases. But I think that, having that protection on the books is hugely helpful, but only when it's being, able to be enforced and when there's funding available for enforcement, and unfortunately, that's a challenge, to get testers out and to enforce these laws, because these stereotypes run very deep, and it takes a lot to overcome.
And I will jump on. I agree with everything that Jeanmarie said. We too have the source of income ordinance in Cook County. It was passed in August of 2013. And what we did was we jumped right on it and did a campaign around our county, 123 municipalities we reached out to. I went to broker offices and did presentations at realtor meetings and educated landlords at association meetings to get that education piece out there, because a lot of times, and certainly not all, but a lot of times it's the education piece. So we may get a tenant that complains that they feel they were discriminated on based on source of income. The first thing we do is pick up the phone and we'll call the landlord or the entity and discuss source of income with them. Sometimes it's, I didn't know about it. Well, maybe you should attend one of our meetings and you can learn more about it. And whether they're telling us the truth or not, I don't know. And then when we have the tenant check back, they've processed them accordingly. But that isn't always the case. So if we have really cases that are clearly violating the source of income ordinance, we will refer them over to our enforcement agency. So I know that one of the questions was, do we enforce? We do not. We have our human rights department at the county that we refer. I will even get calls from the county, their investigators that will call me and ask me questions and help me to try to work with a landlord. Again, at the end of the day, they don't want to have a complaint filed against a landlord. They want to educate them on the source of income and, ways to not violate our tenants' rights. The other piece, and I wanted to mention important, is, tenants need to know about this ordinance, and a lot of tenants don't. So at every move briefing, every voucher issuance briefing, we discuss this. We give them the tools and information. Hey, if you feel you're violated, this is what you should do. This is the parameters of the ordinance. So a lot of times I think agencies forget that you really also have to educate your tenants on the ordinance. Thanks.
Yeah, I will say from our interviews in DC, which I just read through again recently, it's quite remarkable the diversity of interpretation of the source of income discrimination rules that we saw amongst our landlords. And they have even less incentive to lie to us as a non-enforcement IRB protected conversation. And everything from folks who had no idea that it was like the law in DC, and DC is a fairly small defined jurisdiction, to folks who were all kinds of manners in which they didn't think it applied to them, or they just, and then of course the thing that it's very hard to do anything about, which is, oh yes, the source of income, we have to accept vouchers, but we have a credit score requirement that means no vouchers ever get housed here. So that's not an enforcement issue, more of a fundamental challenge to what's legal in terms of tenant screening.
Before you go on,
please,
can I step in and give you our experience here in Columbus? I did put it in the chat as one of the answers, but we just got a housing for all legislation in Central Ohio that started, I believe, July 1st. And one of the things that we have noticed, we haven't necessarily experienced the blatant discrimination. Our landlords have just gotten clever. Our landlords know what our thresholds are. Our thresholds here, our clients aren't allowed to pay more than 40%. That's the very max rent burden they're allowed to pay. Our market here, though, says the rents can be significantly higher than that. And there will be people who will apply and they will accept that higher rent, which now puts our voucher clients outside of the group. They don't even get to apply because their income isn't 4 times the rent or anything like that. They're very, very clever here from what I've seen.
Yeah, that definitely resonates. That's a complexities, and I'll leave it to the lawyers to to talk more about it, of how you are legally allowed to interpret income when you have a voucher and what those 30% requirements mean. But yeah, the cleverness abounds. I'm also, while I have you on the big screen, or at least on my big screen, Justin, I'm curious about the answer you wrote in the chat to this question of how much are financial incentives really necessary, and the Cook County program and the CMTO program, really emphasize the voucher and the sort of having this advocate on your side, and less direct financial incentive. So you have a program that seems to be very successful with the financial incentive. So I'm curious, basically what you wrote as an answer in the chat here. What your thoughts are on it?
So Seattle's market, I think, and I will qualify this by saying I am a real estate agent in Central Ohio. So I have a strong understanding of what we're doing here. But from what I know about Seattle's, theirs is a stronger, more expensive market than ours. So when I hear about low poverty neighborhoods, I immediately start to have questions about what's going on in those neighborhoods. What we saw in our neighborhoods was heavy amounts of gentrification, where you saw families now priced out of the neighborhoods they've lived in for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They can't even afford the taxes now because things have increased so much. So when I hear Seattle and what they're doing and not using any incentives and still getting landlords, I just get curious to know what are some of the surrounding parameters associated with that.
I don't know if you have any insight there, Jackie. I know you're in the metro, as it were. Any thoughts on the value of just more money? There's I feel like there's 2 kinds of more money. There's more money like an extra incentive, and then there's, we're not going to make you lower your rent to take a voucher holder, and those 2 things operate. I'm curious on your thoughts, Jackie.
Right. I mean, it is challenging. Certainly in our opportunity areas, anything positive that we can provide for landlords to, what I say, get their foot in the door. So I think it's great. The incentives are great. We might get the landlord, but then, are they going to retain these tenants? So that's when, again, our landlord outreach and our education is going to come in, where we can hopefully give them a positive experience on the program, where not only do they get our mobility clients in their units and opportunity areas, but the retention is there. And then again, that's on our mobility counselor side to also work with the tenants to make sure that they're not only, getting into those units, but retaining, staying there for others. So I do think they are a benefit. But again, like you talked about, we have landlords that we try to get them to accept lower rents. Doesn't always work. Again, it depends on what the housing market is. And that's a challenge as well.
Wonderful. Well, we tragically only have a minute remaining, and I want to make sure you stay on time. There are many excellent questions remaining in the chat that I want to ask you, but there's another panel to come. So if anyone has any sort of final thoughts, things that I didn't that weren't asked about, or things you want to mention right now, by all means, jump on the mic.
Only thing I have, support emergency housing vouchers. Probably one of the more important challenges we have right now is getting those leased up. So lease to an emergency housing voucher.
Terrific. Other thoughts, Jeanmarie or Jackie?
Just want to, this has been great. A lot of great information, Justin. I love your numbers. Jeanmarie gave me I know you said I gave you insight, but you gave me a lot of great insight as well. So, and Phil, I love your studies. So thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Jeanmarie.
Yeah, just likewise. This has been great. And just one, I think I hit that I would answer live instead of typing my answer, but there was one quick question, just where's the funding coming from for the HQI funds that we're dispersing, and that is through the grant we have from Enterprise for the pilot mobility program. So I just wanted to answer that quickly, but other than that, thank you. This has been a great panel.
Yes, thank you, all the panelists. It was really, really fascinating. I'll probably be sending you follow-up emails with questions. So I appreciate it, and thank you for all the great questions in the Q&A to our audience. And I believe now we move into the fourth session of the evening.